Hello my fellow zombies and welcome back to the East Coast, and a very happy Spooktober to you all. Now I know what you're thinking, it is indeed November and no longer Spooktober, but my response to that is simply, you're assuming that time is linear, and who's to say it's not Spooktober somewhere in the cosmos and this video is not in fact a week late, but arriving exactly when it's meant to.
That's suspicious.
As I was saying, today we'll be making our favorite Italian plumber, but instead of being his usual plucky self, this time our beloved Mario will be wearing the metaphorical flesh of every real-world plumber I have ever met that outwardly loathes their job, but loves their paycheck. For this particular sculpt, we will be layering our meat sack with some bones, some fatty flesh, and clothes. And for this zombie, today we'll be starting with an oversized, purposefully cartoonish skull. And pro tip, if you say something is intentionally inaccurate, the clapback is minimal. With that, I'll impress in the vertical lines of the teeth and bake the upper portion of the skull so that I can sponge a white over the red that got mixed in accidentally, and in a shocking twist here, I'll actually plan ahead and add a wire armature for the future nose. I did toy with the idea of an exposed nasal cavity, but I think part of what makes Mario Mario is his legendary stash and his whopping honker. I can quickly make a lower mandible with some double wound steel and have a wee chuckle to myself about how much he looks like Boney from Trapdoor. The souffle clay is pretty soft and actually recommended for people that are arthritic, but luckily, as previously mentioned, this is more of a caricature, so it'll do for now. And with a quick smoothing and poking with a stiff brush, we can move on to the body. I'll make the base armature for the legs and the upper body, and then I'll straighten out a piece of wire in my drill for the arms. I can bend the body into my desired pose and then glue these together and use some baking soda to speed up the gluing process by way of exothermic reaction, which is a fancy way of saying it's getting a bit hot. For our flabby Mario torso, we will need some of that desaturated, cartoonishly green zombie flesh. But I don't have any. Lucky for me, I went to play school, where I learned that mixing white and green makes a slightly lighter green. In bulking up the body, I'll add the fat belly of tinfoil and the glorious fupa, as I imagine in this particular zombie apocalypse, Mario has been quite successful in consuming the trusting inhabitants of the Mushroom Kingdom. I can smoosh on a couple of lamb chops because, as we have discussed in the past, I am hashtag not a sculptor, and though the body will be mostly clothed by the end, it's always good to practice anatomy. And remember, there are no shortcuts in life, or booty sculpting. I can conduct a quick size check, confirm with the seal of approval, I approve! Increase the fupa further, as I want my plumber to be the cinnamon roll guy level of obese.
That is not the correct way to eat a cinnamon roll!
And then I can provide Mario some seductive areolas and a redundant feeding hole before adding some back musculature. Unknown to most, Mario covers his back in mushroom-based steroid cream and therefore looks particularly jacked. To convey said jackness, I'll add in the trapezius muscles, the rhomboids, and the teres majors separately, and then blend them into the body. Unfortunately, the mushrooms of the Mushroom Kingdom have a surprisingly high fat content, equivalent to land seals, and the puppy fat has all gone to Mario's hips, and so I'll add a couple of gravity-related fat rolls, and some of those cute little butt dimples, and then we can go make some bones. For the bones, there's really not too much to say here. I roll out a little sausage and then roll any tool with the cylindrical body down the center to give it that bony appeal. The spine, however, was a bit more fun. I roll out a slightly longer sausage, demarcate the vertebrae with a ruler, and then with not the same size but close enough bald stylus, I impress in some semblance of bony vertebrae, leaving me with the ittiest bittiest little zombie spine I have ever seen, and it is totes adorbs. To make Mario's exposed eyeball, I can put a ball on a wire and move on to what we all came here for. Much like the battle damage to the robots, fleshy damage to zombies is the most pleasurable part of the sculpt. And as zombie sculpts on YouTube are a dime a dozen, I'm not introducing anything new here. I made the spine a little bit too big, but as my boys know, it's better to be too big than too little. But I can snip the tip. Place accordingly and excavate out the posterior chain, which can be dimpled before receiving its femur. I'll also add a clavicle because it just felt right. And then I use itty bitty strips of skin to drape over the exposed bones to make it extra icky. I'll then take some time to give the body a once over with a variety of open wounds and decomposing flesh before deciding that the horror aficionado in me wants to see some guts.
There's a perfectly ordinary English sentence.
I'll roll out a long rope of intestines and give them some ribbing with a ruler before stuffing them into the tummy hole and giving our zombie the ever important infection bite mark. And let me know in the comments section who you think bit our beloved but doomed hero. Was it inflicted by an understated Goomba? Or was it heartbreakingly close? Was he bitten by a zombified Luigi? Blinded by brotherly love? Was he unable to cut down his wilting sibling? But moving back to the skull for a moment, I'll add the exposed muscle tissue to the eye socket and the torn flesh to where the skin becomes skull. That can then get the decomposing pokey treatment before we amputate an aluminium arm in favor of a steel upgrade. I folded a single piece of double wound wire back on itself to act as the humerus, radius and ulna, which I can coat in clay toward the end, but for now we need to make a foot. The foot begins as a little bean that I can blend into the ankle and shape into a general foot shape. The toes get separated by way of blade, then silicone shaper, and I can add a wee bit of the top foot intrigue with a ball stylus. I can then impress in the suggestion of toenails, hoping that down the line people don't notice I gave Mario 5 toes but only 4 cartoonish fingers. The front leg can get its own exposed bone, and the outstretched "They're coming for you, Barbara" arm gets a compound fracture because why not? Biologically, none of this makes sense anyway. And with a little bit of scratching around the body, we have a well-weathered, ridiculously chunky boy ready to be baked. A quick head check and I can get on to making Mario's delightful red sweater. I've got this laundry bag lying around which apparently protects bras with a magic that I'll never fully understand. But I can impress this texture into the surface and begin to apply strips of clothing around the body in no particular order, very much in a go by feel kind of way. In full transparency, I've never played Super Mario Odyssey because I'm a grown-up that was born in the late 1900s, and in my 20s I had to make a very important decision. Play video games as a hobby, or get jacked? I chose the latter, and regret nothing. But with that said, as a result of my countless hours lifting heavy things and not moving them anywhere, my favorite Mario is this guy. But he actually looked like this. That aside, my best friend growing up had an N64, and Mario 64 is goated. Let me know in the comments who's your favorite Mario. From Tanuki Mario to, this guy. I'll finish off the dungarees by pressing some fabric folds willy-nilly and use a less than ideal soft silicone shaper to add the seams to the denim, and I can start to build up the skin on the ever so slightly less damaged part of the skull. But first I'll press in that ever so important texture where it has been smoothed out in the wrinkling process. I'll lay this down in a thin layer and give it the old roly-poly with the stylus because, as we all know, there's no such thing as a smooth zombie.
Why not?
His skin gets poked like Rick Grimes is mildly upset with him, and the traditional zombie stringy cheek tendrils can be added for extra zombification. A pre-baked eye can then be pressed into the eye socket and the surrounding area gets a good old wrinkling. The idea is that the more tattered we can make the skin, the more fun the paint job will be. Now for the lip accessory and nose that will turn our generic zombie into Super Mario zombie. Though looking at him here, he looks more like Luigi with a narrow lower jaw, so I'll simply build that up later so he looks like the more squat of the brothers. Happy with the head, now I can move on to making Mario's tiara, which in this instance is a fireman's axe firmly planted in his cranium, which of course means that Nintendo zombie lore varies wildly from everything I thought I knew about zombie killing, and now I don't know who I can trust anymore, and I'm questioning everything. Surely not everyone was kung fu fighting. But never mind, I'll just assume this Mario's been hit in the head with an extra blunt axe, which resulted in a relatively unharmed brain protruding at the side of his skull. After a quick cleanup, I can perform a much outdated frontal lobotomy and form-fit the precarious eyeball before making a gloved hand. Firstly, I'll slice in the fingers, and after a quick twist, I'll add the thumb before twisting the fingers into a sufficiently mangled position, then chop off the glove tips and add a few exposed fingertips. I'll add the hand pads and the seemingly useless knuckle pads, then I can press the hand onto the wrist, safe in the knowledge that Mario 100% has 4 fingers, not 5, and there's no need to check that. The neck and the mouth get some finishing touches, and I can move on to the pre-flayed arm, which I'll build up with a white bony clay and delineate the joints of the 3 primary bones with a firm silicone pokey doodad. I'll bake the presumably useless but self-animated appendage and make the fictional hand bones by squishing some balls together to make wafer fingers that are essentially small sausages I can roll a couple of knuckles into and softly roll a bony shape down the center of. Leaving me with the cutest little finger or the worst of the Dark Lord's wands. I'll glue the hand to the wrist and carefully throw all the fingers into place, and that is the body sculpted, and we can sit back, admire our work, and move on to the timber handle of the axe. To add said handle, I can finger a sliver of brown clay into the desired position and add a wood grain with a steel tool over cling film, which will buffer and soften the appearance. Like so. This is my big tray of tricks that will be relevant later, but off for about 5 minutes in the oven at the moment, whilst we once again delve deep into the world of
Mediocre painting.
I started the paint job with a runny dark green wash in the vein of cartoon zombies and gently caressed the wilting body of our overfed plumber until the wash was well established in all the nooks and crannies. I can dab away the excess with a mostly absorbent sponge and set aside to dry whilst I apply a fire truck red to my fireman's axe. I did ask Reddit, why are firemen's axes red, and the top reply was, to hide the blood. And as the internet is never wrong, I have to take this as absolute fact and never question it again. Further to the red, I sponge on some silver to show a little bit of aging and dry brush the timber handle. And within all the little notches that I filed in earlier, I will, for no other reason than the rule of cool, apply copious amounts of rust to the axe and all my fiance's metal instruments in the bathroom.
Some men just want to watch the world burn.
For the spiffy dungarees, I went full David Goggins on the dry brushing and was unrelenting in the sheer number of coats applied. I started with a medium blue, then an ever so slightly lighter blue, and then another ever so slightly lighter blue, and another, and another, and round the merry-go-round. Finally, with the white, I'll add some edge highlights inadequately before doing just a smidge on the red, realizing it would get all over the dungarees and moving on swiftly to exposed shiny goopy organs. In a little palette, I'll mix red, purple, black and water for this, and I'll start by glazing the big brain, followed by the head wound and then the edge of the eye. I'll allow the eye a few seconds to start setting before painting in a thicker white center. The rest of the gashes, scratches and gouges can get a messy bloody glaze before finishing off the goopy bits on the hanging eyeball. For the bones, I didn't want them to be too brown, so after giving them an initial thick coat of wash, I can remove the majority of it with a heavy-handed sponge, making sure to break off every single finger in the process. And between you and me, this happened multiple times. With the skull drying and the skin dry, I'll dry brush the skin in a pale green and then sponge white onto the mostly dry but still a little wet skull. What this did was allow the white and the darker leather brown to blend nicely together, which I of course 100% knew would happen. I am Picasso incarnate. Hear me roar. Meow. Next on our to-do list is a Goomba. Why, you ask? Because Mario is now a zombie, and zombies are historically villains, with the exception, of course, of Bub. And also, I saw North of the Border make one of these, and it looked pretty easy. Now, this Goomba is literally a soft cone that you can poke a couple of eyes into, Then drop in a couple of dead white eyes and add eyebrows to carry out the emotion of your particular Goomba. I add a couple of tusks, and then in a tip I saw on Ace of Clay, I'll drape the bottom lip over the bottom teeth. I can smooth in the lip, and with a sharp shaper I'll give this grumpy mushroom some crow's feet and the lip lines. I bake the head in some little foot beans, which will be the bread in this mushroom stock sandwich, and with a little texturing I can bake the lot to fuse together and dapple on a very pale bone beige. Once dry, the plan was to liven this fun guy back up ever so slightly with a wash, but when that dried he just looked like a perfectly healthy boy again. Oh well. Onward we march to make a tray simple base, which is quite plainly a piece of MDF painted black with various browns sponged on top. This will be adorned with a variety of mushrooms. So let's make some mushrooms. I'll make a series of red and green caps with the white stalks that I glue together with a basic superglue and strategically position them around the base, being sure to leave a positively throbbing one-up mushroom in Mario's path, leaving my depraved mind to wonder what happens to a man when he's brought back to life with half his flesh missing and an axe in place of his favourite hat.
The hell wrong with you?
Finishing up the base, I'll lay down a thinned out layer of PVA glue and water, followed by a heavy sprinkle of grass flocking, and finally I can dot in the white spots on the mushrooms with a Q-tip. For the finishing touches, you know what time it is. It is time to bring out that high gloss varnish. I'll start up top with the presumably functional eye. The bulging brain follows, and then the eye with the thickest optic nerve ever conceived. The mouth, of course, is salivating for peaches, and there's even time for a pedicure. And finally, the mushrooms get a varnish, and I'll give the back leg a few, but not all toes. And that is the sculpting all but finished, and now a word from our sponsors. It's just me. There are no sponsors. Now I'm getting pretty close to that ever elusive 1000 subs, so if you did in fact enjoy the video, then feel free to subscribe and leave a comment if you're into that sort of thing. I'll leave you with the glamour shots today, and as always, between now and next time I see you, be creative, be artistic in whatever way that means to you, and as always, go make a mess.
It's me, Mario!